In at number 10, we have Vincent Gigante. For more than 3 decades, Vincent Gigante, boss of New York's Genovese crime family, feigned insanity to avoid jail time. He wandered around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe and slippers, mumbling gibberish and even talking to parking meters. His act was so convincing that FBI agents found him standing naked in a running shower, clutching an open umbrella. Imagine, my dear ghouls, the masterminds who've evaded justice by faking insanity. Oh, the horror, the cunning, the audacity. Tonight we'll delve into the top 10 masterminds who've pulled off this terrifying trick. In at number 9, we have James Lindsay. Accused of murdering 15-year-old Emma Thompson, James Lindsay claimed to have paranoid schizophrenia, telling doctors that the devil had told him to kill. He even sent a letter to a friend outlining his plan to get into a hospital and be released after 8 years. He was sentenced to life in prison. In at number 8, the tale unfolds of a man named Kenneth Bianchi, whose actions chilled the hearts of even those experienced in the study of the human mind. A serial killer, he was known for his cold-blooded murders, but his wickedness didn't stop there. In a perverse twist, he decided to play a game of make-believe with those who sought to understand him. Bianchi's ploy was to claim that he was suffering from multiple personality disorder, asserting that an alternate personality named Steve was responsible for his heinous acts. The story was a twisted fabrication, a dark fantasy constructed to elude justice. In at number 7, we encounter a tale of cunning, determination and audacity. This story transports us to the grim setting of a German prisoner of war camp during World War II, a place filled with despair, uncertainty and the longing for freedom. He decided to feign madness, an act that required an intricate understanding of the very essence of mental illness. But for a skilled psychiatrist like Ferguson, this was not an insurmountable challenge. He managed to convince his captors that he had lost his grip on reality, displaying symptoms so convincingly that they had no choice but to believe him. In at number 6, we find an ancient tale that has stood the test of time and transcended many generations. It's a story that brings together elements of fear, cunning and survival, set in the biblical landscape where King David faced the wrath of King Achish. It was then that David decided to feign madness, a tactic that seemed bizarre, but turned out to be ingeniously effective. He began to act like a madman, drumming on the doors of the gate and letting saliva dribble down his beard. This display was so convincing that King Achish dismissed him as harmless and insane, exclaiming, "Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me?" In at number 5, we have Charles Manson, the notorious cult leader responsible for the brutal Tate LaBianca murders, put on an extravagant display during his trial, often making bizarre statements and even carving a swastika into his forehead. Although many believe his madness was genuine, others argue that it was a calculated act to escape responsibility. He was convicted, but his behavior continues to be a subject of debate. In at number 4, we have Ted Kaczynski. Known as the Unabomber, Kaczynski waged a mail bombing campaign over nearly 2 decades. When he was caught, his defense team wanted to use an insanity plea, but Kaczynski refused, seeing it as a greater insult than the death penalty. While he didn't fake insanity himself, the debate around his mental state during the trial and his idiosyncratic, though highly intelligent manifesto leaves many to wonder if a plea of insanity might have been successful if pursued. In at number 3, we find Jeffrey Dahmer, a name that became synonymous with some of the most horrific and cold-blooded crimes of the late 20th century. The infamous serial killer's attempt to plead insanity during his trial is an intriguing chapter in a story filled with brutality, cunning, and ultimately, justice. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was responsible for the murders and dismemberments of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. His crimes were not only shocking in their brutality, but also in their twisted ritualistic elements. Dahmer would engage in necrophilia and even cannibalism with some of his victims. Given the sheer savagery and inhumanity of his crimes, Dahmer's defense attempted to plead insanity during his 1992 trial. The argument was that only a person who was profoundly mentally ill could commit acts of such depravity. The defense's case relied heavily on expert psychiatric testimony, aiming to prove that Dahmer was suffering from a mental disorder that rendered him unable to control his impulses. In at number 2, we find the heart-wrenching and highly debated case of Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children in a bathtub in 2001. This case not only shook the nation, but also led to a significant debate over the legal definition of insanity and how mental illness is addressed within the criminal justice system. The subsequent trial was a high-profile legal battle, with the nation divided over the proper judgment for her unspeakable act. Her defense team pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, arguing that Yates's mental condition at the time of the murders was so impaired that she could not discern right from wrong. The prosecution, on the other hand, insisted that despite her mental illness, Yates was aware of the wrongfulness of her actions. They pointed to evidence such as her 911 call and her statements to police as proof of her awareness and intent. In at number 1, we have the chilling case of Edward Charles Alloway, a custodian at California State University, Fullerton, whose shooting rampage in 1976 left 7 people dead and 2 others wounded. Alloway's case is particularly noteworthy not only for the violence of his act, but also for the subsequent legal proceedings where insanity played a central role. During his trial, Alloway's defense pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The insanity defense is an uncommon and often controversial legal strategy where the defendant acknowledges the criminal act, but claims that, due to mental illness, they were unable to understand the wrongfulness of their actions at the time. In Alloway's case, both the defense and prosecution's psychiatrists examined him and agreed that he was insane at the time of the killings. They diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, characterized by delusions and hallucinations. Reportedly, Alloway believed that there was a conspiracy involving his co-workers, who he thought were making and distributing pornographic films featuring his estranged wife. And there you have it, my dear ghouls, a glimpse into the terrifying world of masterminds who've evaded justice by faking insanity. Remember, not everything is as it seems, and sometimes the mind can be a real scream.